session 100. And we continue with Genesis 37. We left off at verse 11 yesterday. His brothers, Joseph's brothers, envied him, but his Abba observed the saying. So Jacob kept this in his heart. He knew there was something more to this dream than meets the eye. Verse 12. And his brothers went to feed their father's flock in Shechem. So by now you know that in this one verse, there's almost, let me see, there's 1, 2, 3, 4. There's 4 deeply prophetic things. Can you see them? Can you recognize them by now? Let's look at the first one. The brothers, right? So this represents 11 of the 12 tribes of Israel, of the kingdom. They went to feed their father's flock. Their father is Jacob, but his name was changed to Israel. But also he represents symbolically Father Yahuwah. So the flock, the sheep of the Messiah. We read about Messiah being the shepherd. We read about how the lost sheep of Israel must come home. We read about how the Messiah will look for the lost sheep all the time. So, yeah, the 11 tribes were still together. They weren't scattered yet. They weren't split into 2 houses yet. They were still one kingdom. And they were feeding the sheep. They were feeding the sheep of Israel. But where? You remember we've dealt in so many details, so many times about Shechem, the Valley of Decisions. So Israel is feeding all the sheep of the kingdom in Shechem. The kingdom of God, which is called Israel, from the seed of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Israel, will always be fed the word of God at Shechem. Because that is where we come together and we make the decision to follow Yahuwah or not. And Israel said to Joseph, "Do not your brothers feed the flock in Shechem? Come, and I will send you to them." Very important, because when we read the New Testament, Yeshua says time and time again, "My Father has sent me." Just like Jacob sent Joseph to his brothers, just the same, Yahuwah sent Messiah to his brothers. He sent Yeshua to this world. He sent him to the house of Judah in Jerusalem, but he also sent him to Samaria and to Galilee. Those were the northern areas where the 10 tribes symbolically are represented from. So beautiful how Joseph is the sent one. Messiah is the sent one, sent to his brothers. And Joseph said, "Hinyani." You know that word. It means, "Here I am, and I'm willing to do whatever you tell me." The same with the Messiah. When Father Yahuwah sent him, he didn't say, "No, I rather want to stay in heaven. It's nice and cozy and comfortable. I don't want to go to earth. I don't want to go and die." No, Messiah also said, "Hinyani." Joseph didn't know what was lying ahead for him. He didn't know his brothers was going to kill him, basically throw him in a deep pit, sell him as a slave, and fake his death to his father. He didn't know this was lying ahead, but Yeshua knew, because we know Psalm 22, we know Isaiah 53, and all those various prophecies where it's prophesied that Yeshua or the Messiah would come and carry our burdens, and with his stripes we are healed. And that's just mentioning 2 of the prophecies. There's hundreds. But Yeshua knew what was lying ahead for him. Yet, still in the Garden of Gethsemane, he said, "Not your will, my Father. Not my will, but your will." He also said, "Hinyani." And Jacob said to Joseph, "Please go and see whether things are well with your brothers, and if things are well with the flocks." And that's exactly the same. Yeshua as the first fruit. Yeshua as our older brother. Yeshua as our Messiah. He came to this earth to see how it's going with his brothers. How is it going with the house of Judah and the house of Israel? How is it going with the flocks, the sheep, and the goats? He came to check out everything and take word back to his Father. And Jacob said, and bring me word again. So he sent him out to the valley of Hebron, and he came to Shechem. And a certain man found Joseph as he was wandering around in the field. Now let's stop here for a minute. It doesn't identify the man. That's the first thing. Secondly, this man knew exactly where Joseph's brothers were. And if Joseph didn't find his brothers at Shechem, he would have gone home. And then none of the hugely prophetic mystery in Joseph's life would ever happened. Joseph wouldn't have gone to Egypt. He wouldn't have saved everybody from a famine. So this man, we believe that this was the Messiah. This man met him while he was wandering around, lost and alone in the field. And he asked him, "What are you looking for?" And Joseph said, "I'm looking for my brothers. Please tell me where they feed their flocks." How's this man supposed, if this was just a normal human being, how was he supposed to know where Joseph's brothers went to feed their flocks? I mean, there's a lot of people in the field from various different tribes and areas. They're feeding their flocks in the field. These people don't necessarily speak to each other. So this man is also just wandering in the field. He's not walking there with any other people or with sheep or with goats. He just happened to appear to Joseph. And the man said, "They have departed from here, for I heard them say." Okay, so if this man was close enough to Joseph's brothers to hear them say in the Hebrew language, because remember, they spoke Hebrew, right? They were living in the land of the Canaanites at that moment. The land hasn't been given into the hand of Joshua yet. So the rest of the people in this land didn't speak Hebrew. So first of all, this man understood Hebrew, which makes you think. Secondly, how was he close enough to the brothers? Because these brothers didn't like the Canaanites very much. I mean, just a while ago, they murdered a whole town. So, and we also looked how God brought fear unto all the cities, so they didn't attack Jacob and his clan. So we're just wondering, there's a huge mystery behind this man that met Joseph in the field. But nevertheless, so this man said that he heard them say, "Let us go to Dothan." And Joseph went after his brothers and found them in Dothan. When they saw him far off, even before he came near to them, they conspired against him to kill him. Now we need to think about the time of Messiah, right? And now we need to see in the prophetic how his brothers, especially Judah, because you'll see how Judah was quite a leader in amongst his brothers. And now we can see how Judah, as the leader, is conspiring against Joseph to kill him. This sounds very, very similar to something in Mark chapter 3, verse 6. And the Pharisees left immediately and took counsel with the Herodians against Joshua, so that they might destroy him or kill him. Do you read? It's almost the same sentence. Judah and his brothers conspired against Joseph, who is also a prophetic, symbolic picture of Messiah. And I'll still prove that to you. I've given you some proof yesterday on how he's wearing the multicolored coat. Every nation, tribe, and tongue. But there's huge prophecy still lying ahead. But here in the Old Testament, Judah and his brothers are conspiring against Joseph on how to kill him. In Mark chapter 3, the Pharisees, who are from the tribe of Judah, and the Herodians are conspiring against Joshua on how they might kill him. It's exactly the same words. Can you see the prophetic puzzle pieces coming together? And they said one to another, "See, the dreamer is coming. Come now and let us kill him and cast him into some pit." just like the Pharisees conspired against Joshua, and they killed him, and they wanted to throw him also in Gehenna. If you haven't listened or viewed the Where the Hell Do We Go When We Die sessions yet, so you can understand the difference between the grave and being dead and being cast into hell or being cast into the pit, please visit our website and click on the YouTube channel and look for the playlist Where the Hell Do We Go When We Die. You can just visit Two Trees in the Garden.co.za. But here, cast him into the pit. When people died in the time of Yeshua, and they were seemed to be criminal, because only criminals were crucified, they were thrown onto the rubbish heap, which was called Gehenna. It was in the valley of Gehinnom. And it's basically also called a pit because there's always smoke and there's always worms, and the smoke, the fire doesn't really stop because people keep on throwing criminals' dead bodies and animals' dead bodies and rubbish and stuff there. It was the rubbish dump. And the Pharisees planned to eventually throw him there. If it wasn't for, what was that guy's name? I can't remember. If it wasn't for him that claimed Yeshua's body to put it into a beautiful cave, like a grave that was dug out in a cave area, then the Pharisees would have thrown Yeshua's body in the pit, in the rubbish pit. All right. Come now and let us kill him and cast him into some pit, and we will say, some evil beast has devoured him, and we shall see what will become of his dreams. It's horrible. Can you imagine your own brother or your own sister conspiring to kill you, and then lying to your father to say that his favorite son, the son that he loved so, so very much? Makes me think of Abraham, and Yahweh said, Abraham, Abraham, and he said, Hinyani, and Yahweh said, take your son, your only son, the one whom you love. And here Joseph was the only thing that Jacob had left of his beloved Rachel, and he loved Joseph much more than all the brothers. How callous and insensitive the brothers were to think that they would break their father's heart in such a way, and they didn't even care. And Reuben heard it, and he delivered him out of their hands, and he said, let us not kill him. So, as the firstborn, Reuben had a little bit of backbone, and he decided, no, you know what, let's make another plan. Let's not kill him. Let's rather, you can throw him in the pit, but his plan was later on to send him back to his father. Because as the oldest brother, he did feel that kind of responsibility, and he didn't agree with his brothers, which is nice. At least here Reuben was standing up for Joseph. And Reuben said to them, shed no blood, but cast him into the pit that is in the wilderness. Lay no hand upon him, that he might remove him out of their hands to deliver him to his father again. That was Reuben's plan. And it came to pass when Joseph came to his brothers that they stripped Joseph of his coat. The Jews today also are not happy with the Gentiles coming into the Jewish movement. That's how they see it. But the Gentiles are not coming into a Jewish movement. The Gentiles are coming back to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And if we keep Sabbath and the holy feast days, and we eat kosher and we keep a kosher lifestyle, it doesn't mean that that belongs to the Jewish people, so they can be jealous of the house of Israel, because it doesn't belong to them anyway. It belongs to God. It's God's commandments. And also today, just like in this time, the Jews don't want the Gentiles to come into this movement. Don't matter what you call it. Some people call it the Messianic movement, the Hebrew movement, the Hebrew roots movement. It doesn't really matter. But just like they stripped Joseph of his multicolored coat, just like that today, they want to strip Yeshua of the multicolored coat. They don't want people from every tribe, nation, and tongue to become what they think is Jewish. And also we know the church think going back to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob is Jewish, but we've done enough study to know that the word of God, the seed from the tree of life, is everlasting. It doesn't belong to the Jews. It belongs to God and to the people that He chooses, because the people that looks for Him is part of His kingdom. But here we see that they stripped Joseph of his multicolored coat. And they took him and cast him into a pit. And the pit was empty. There was no water in it. Otherwise, he would have drowned, because a lot of these pits, when it rained a lot, the water would gather in the pit, and poor Joseph would have drowned. But I can just imagine, and I'm thinking here of Paul and who was with Paul? Paulus and Silas. Yeah, it was Silas, Paul and Silas. They were also at one stage in a dungeon. They were locked up in prison. And if you do a bit of research and you know how the prisons were in those days, it was horrible. It was pitch dark. It was below the ground. It was basically in the sewerage systems below the cities. And here I can just imagine poor Paul and Silas. They were sitting there in the filth and in ice cold water and sewerage dripping on them and coming past them, and they were sitting in that stuff. But they were singing praises. And I see the same here with Joseph. He was thrown into this pit. It's pitch dark and it's cold, and there's probably also a bit of water that gathered in the pit. And he was sitting in that muddy, ice-cold situation. And they sat down to eat bread, and they lifted up their eyes and looked, and see a company of Ishmaelites came from Gilead with their camels, bearing spices and balm and myrrh, going to carry it down to Mitzrayim, to Egypt. All right, Mitzrayim is the name of one of the sons of Ham. You remember Shem, Ham, and Japheth, the three sons of Noah. Ham, one of his sons, was called Mitzrayim, Egypt. And also here, the Ishmaelites, the descendants of Ishmael, they, even up to today, they are traders. They had their camels and they were trading spices and taking it all over the world. And that's why even still today you can see them. They've got all the shops and all the trading is going on with them. And Judah said to his brothers, you see how Judah is taking the lead. What profit is it if we kill our brother and we conceal his blood? Come and let us sell him to the Ishmaelites. I'm just wondering also, maybe Judah here remembered the story of Cain and Abel, and maybe it bothered him and he was scared that if they tried to conceal Joseph's blood, then Joseph's blood would also, just like Abel's blood, call out from the earth. Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let not our hand be upon him. For he is our brother after all, and our flesh. And his brothers were content. So historically, Judah has desired separation from Joseph. Still today, Judah wants to be separate from Joseph. But what I also find very interesting here is that his brothers sold him to the Ishmaelites, just like Judah in the New Testament, Judas Iscariot sold Yeshua to the Pharisees. The price that Judah received was 30 pieces of silver. And I think I have told you this yesterday, in the Torah, that is the price of a slave. And here Joseph was sold and he became a slave, also prophetic of the Messiah. Then they passed by Midianite traders, and they drew and lifted up Joseph out of the pit, and sold Joseph to the Ishmaelim for 20 pieces of silver. And they brought Joseph into Mitzrayim, into Egypt. So here the Ishmaelites are also called Midianites because they lived in the area of Midian. When Reuben returned to the pit, he saw Joseph was not in the pit, and he tore his clothes. ancient culture, if you were very sad, very distressed, you would tear your clothes. And also in the Bible, God says at one stage, stop tearing your clothes and maybe start tearing your heart. Because it doesn't help that you just do the outside actions. It must really, you must feel it from the inside. But here we know that Reuben, his intentions was to save Joseph. And Judah and the guys just waited until Reuben, turned his back, and then they sold Joseph. And he returned to his brothers and said, the child is not there. Where shall I go? What does he mean with where shall I go? It's logical. The oldest brother is always responsible for the youngest. So he was afraid of his father. He said, where shall I go? I can't go home. How can I face Jacob? How can I face my father and say that I didn't watch over his youngest son? And they took Joseph's coat, and they killed a kid of the goats and dipped the coat in the blood. Okay, stop here. Let your mind race now and look for all the prophetic in this. Because you know by now, right, that the multicolored coat is all nations, tribes, and tongues. But Judah took this coat and they tore it up, just like in the time of Rehoboam. Rehoboam was talking to the prophet, and he was very rebellious, and when he turned away, the prophet grabbed a piece of his coat and the coat tore away, right? And then the prophet said to Rehoboam, just like this, God is going to tear your kingdom and give a part of it to somebody else. And then Jeroboam became king of the 10 northern tribes and Rehoboam king of the 2 southern tribes. But even deeper than that, we know that in the book of Revelation, as well as in other prophetic writings in the Old Testament, it says that God's garment is dipped in blood. Now, if we read Revelation, we know that it's talking specifically about the Messiah. Joseph's coat, and if he represents the Messiah, then the Messiah's coat is dipped in blood. And we see the confirmation of that in the book of Revelation. When he comes and he treads out the parskuip, the wine press, then it will be the wrath of God on this world. And his coat is dipped in blood because he will take revenge on the enemies of God. It's just amazing, the deep prophetic meaning of every little verse in here in Genesis. And they sent the coat of many colors, and they brought it to their Abba and said, this we have found, and we don't know whether it is your son's coat or not. How can you lie in your father's face like this? And he knew it and said, it is my son's coat. An evil beast has devoured him. Joseph is without a doubt torn in pieces. Oh, shame. How will you feel if you find torn, bloody clothes of your child when you were maybe, walking in the field or something, and you knew that this is your child's clothes, and the amount of anguish and heartbreak, because you can just imagine what your child had to go through being attacked by a wild beast. And Jacob tore his clothes, and he put sackcloth on his loins, and he mourned for his son many, many days. And all his sons and all his daughters rose up to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted. And he said, I will go down to Sheol, to my grave, mourning my son. So his father wept for him. And here, as Jacob heard about the death of Joseph, and he sees the torn up multicolored coat and the blood, Jacob tore his clothes. And now I take you again to the New Testament. Just like when Yeshua died, and Father witnessed the death of his beloved Son, Father also tore his clothes, isn't it? Because the mantle, the curtain in the temple tore from top to bottom. Not from bottom to top, from top to bottom, as if Father was taking here by his collar and tore his clothes open, and that curtain tore open. The same time as Joseph, the news of his death came to Jacob, Jacob tore his clothes. Okay, let's end with verse 36. And the Midianites sold Joseph in Mitzrayim to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh and a captain of the guard. Right, tomorrow we'll continue with chapter 38.